So I think reform tends to be a very difficult thing in this country.
Yes.
Problem here is that things are new. We'll be sanctioning different things. And remember, the first 2 years of reform is always a story of mistakes. Somebody who gets an absolutely free ride in the failure of reform in this country is the judiciary.
There's a chart that I shared with you, right? So we have all the Southeast Asian tigers in this, plus China, and we see that their GDP per capita has increased significantly since the 1960s. But if you look at Pakistan, we started off in 1960s almost, shoulder to shoulder with these guys, but now we're at the bottom.
Our economy, where it is today, is actually the result of good times gone bad.
Everyone at the end of the day has to let go of something to get something.
Yes.
For every program.
Yes.
I think it was the same for the 18th Amendment.
Absolutely. These new technologies like ChatGPT and all that, they're phenomenal. I'm shocked at the rate of increase. But you can't outsource your thinking to them. Mm-hmm. This is the problem with development on occasion, or development practitioners or technocrats, is that the ideal, the secularized PowerPoint or Canva presentation is so important to them that the bridge to actually doing something meaningful stops because they're not willing to engage with context and politics.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to Perspective by Impetus, our new podcast series where we invite thought leaders from across the country to talk about reforms in Pakistan. And I have a very special guest today. He's one of the most sought after consultants. He has led many and multiple reforms across the country, worked with many multilaterals. He's a Rhodes Scholar. He is famous for other reasons also, such as being an amazing speaker. And I have Fasi Zaka sahab with me. Thank you so much, Fasi.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
I am so glad you've taken out the time for this. I'd like to start with a very generic question and then, of course, go into details. What do you think about the reforms in Pakistan?
So the reforms are basically the custard reform process. You know, when you've got a 1970s car और उसमें अक्सर थोड़ा बहुत ऑयल का मसला होता है, आप सल्फ लगा रहे होते हैं, कभी आगे चले जाते हैं, फिर बन जाते हैं. So I think reform tends to be a very difficult thing in this country.
Yes.
And it tends to be difficult because we fundamentally have a number of problems. One is that a lot of the reforms also tend to come, some of course are indigenously demanded, some come from the whole donor sector that we have, and all of them have different incentives. Jo political class hai, for them it's incredibly important that reforms can be owned, that they are visible. For bureaucrats, for example, the incentives are almost the opposite. It is that ke isme hum kharab na ho jaye,
Yes.
investigation na aa jaye. Then the other problem is that also continuity of service. And by that I mean is like you'll have a very important reform coming up. Let's say you've got the NFC right now, and suddenly you've been working with someone over transfer ho jata hai. And those are things that are actually surprisingly quite big, that you don't have the kind of continuity you need, because reforms requires not just the will to reform, but also the presence of reformers. You can't have them keep moving around. I think like for the donor also is that the donor is also subject not to domestic concerns, but also what their parent organization wants. Yes. And so we've seen at times where it's all about climate, where at times it becomes about human rights, where it becomes something else. And so the problem sometimes is the linkages of all three.
Yes.
Here the problem with reform really is that all reform creates concentrated pain and dispersed gain. And reform losers जो होते हैं पाकिस्तान में, they are very powerful people. They have advantages. We have industries that are protected. And if we were to do reforms, and उसमें benefits आए and things became more competitive, for example, within the economy, उसकी benefit तो dispersed हो जाती है.
Yes.
Sometimes नज़र भी नहीं आती because it's all incremental.
Yes.
So that's why reform is quite difficult in this country. And I'd also argue is that at least now, within the past 10, 12 years, is the degree of political polarization also translates into a difficulty of moving forward with reform, because ultimately reform requires broad-based consensus as well, because survivability is a big issue.
Yes.
And as we see now, that even for what should be national issues, whoever's in power will champion, the other will, bring it down, and then the reverse happens. So these are issues that bring reform into a lot of difficulty that we have, at least within this country.
So, Fasi, that just takes me to my next question that we were discussing before
Yes.
our podcast as well, that there's a chart that I shared with you, right? So we have all the Southeast Asian tigers in this, plus China, and we see that their GDP per capita has increased significantly since the 1960s. But if you look at Pakistan, we started off in 1960s almost, shoulder to shoulder with these guys, but now we're at the bottom, and we have been, perennial bottom benchers in this particular game, right?
Yes.
Of GDP per capita growth, and it's a clear sign that reform is not working. If reform was working, it would have shown some trickle-down effect in terms of increasing the GDP per capita in
Yes.
some way or another, right?
Yes.
So can we say, based on this, that the reform process in Pakistan has failed? If not, then why is it not working as robustly as these countries have demonstrated?
So I agree. And I think one of the principal issues that we see is that at the time of independence, we were, relatively a breadbasket, flush. We benefited immediately from worldwide changes in agriculture as well.
Yes.
And compared to, let's say, India at the time or everyone else, they sought a non-aligned position, whereas we looked for aid and partners immediately. And I think that created some perverse incentives when it came to developing our own systems, because there was also some degree of external buffer that kept coming in for us. And that could have worked, but what's changed in the meantime is that our population growth has been exponential.
Yes.
And to address that, we now have issues in the sense that our economy is technically fairly narrow. We don't have exports. We need imports. We have no source of, creating or getting dollars other than loans, other than, means of just attracting investment that isn't systemic for us to see that any one industry is really doing well and is bringing in money and is creating, export orientation. So I think that for Pakistan is that the problem now for reform today is that in our quest for stabilization, post that rapid inflation of 38 to 40%, the only way that we can curtail inflation is to make sure we don't grow and we don't import.
Yes.
Right? Now, the problem is any serious reform process is going to continue that pain for some more time,
Yes.
because you're going to have costings that are going to be passed on, subsidies that are going to be eliminated, exemptions that are going to be done away with. And this presents not just a political problem, but also an extreme test on the patience of the people, because we're also looking at that real incomes are falling. And then we're asking them to pay more market rates eventually in some things. We know that this will benefit us by having a more dynamic economy in the long run, but this requires a degree of creativity in terms of economic management going forward. I believe that that can be done with Pakistani policymakers, and they've got the vision. But then we have a straitjacket, which is the IMF.
Yes.
And they have their own ideology when it comes to how we need to manage this. How much the IMF gives us is not a lot. IMF's real value is the signal it sends to other lenders and other markets that Pakistan is behaving with discipline.
Yes.
Which we are doing. But we are not, while addressing one problem such as inflation, such as creating stability in the economy, the real thing, which is like with the added number of people coming every year into the job market, which requires at least 6% growth, is that we are not addressing that. And then this pool of teeming young people is growing with nothing really to do and not being able to see a future going forward. So, I mean, I think that, our economy where it is today is actually the result of good times gone bad, which is what was the feature of our economy, which was aid dependent, rent dependent, international alliances, particularly with the US. And that led to leaders, military and civil, who decided that in order to go forward, it would be better just to use this surplus rather than, actually using that to somehow create more engagement in the economy, to reform it, while you've got a buffer of funding coming in.
Yes.
And so I think right now, I don't have an answer to this, but I think this is probably one of the most critical things Pakistan does, is it gives you incredible growth for 3-4 years, and then it takes it away in the next 3-4 years through inflation.
Yes.
Because that's the typical boom-bust cycle. And that is something that we have to break out of. And the problem is that we're in a bust cycle. We've got a degree of consolidation and some stability. But for reform now to happen is going to continue that element of pain. And I don't see how that it would truly be politically viable to do that. And I don't see the appetite is there. And when there's so much polarization, it becomes more difficult because the stability may exist in the economy, but doesn't exist in terms of the support that is required for states to do something like this.
So how does polarization impact the reform directly? Like, I just wanted to, be more clearer and crisper in our conversation. Like, how does it impact it in a way that maybe it has not impacted it in different countries like India or Sri Lanka? There is polarization there as well.
Yes. There is polarization in those countries, but right now in those countries such as India, is the polarization is where the state is the majoritarian party. And it's with minority parties where it's got an issue. Here it's much more diffuse, right? Because we've got a contested election. We have many more issues which are against the incumbents as well. We've got a federal-provincial division that has just expanded over time. And those things are relatively different from the kind of polarization that we see, say, in India. Why addressing polarization is important is because for reform, where we know that there are small groups that tend to be very popular, whether they're the sugar mafia, whether they are, small cartels that we have everywhere. We can even list the Textile Association in this, who are incredibly powerful. I mean, they're relatively small, but they're disproportionately powerful.
Yes.
And especially now, we're locked into these contracts for energy, which is proving to be like almost, something that could stab the economy in the back if we do not find ways to address it, especially since solar is increasing over time. For anyone to do anything about this, it needs to have some sense that the fragile deck of cards of government doesn't fall on the basis of doing something that is incredibly necessary. And Pakistan has historically, in my opinion, been one of those countries, and most countries are like this, that you would rather kick the can down the road for somebody else to solve than you would. And I don't think that we're at an exemption stage right now. I mean, I sometimes look at, say, some reforms that have succeeded or some programs that have succeeded. It's very interesting to see that, BISP is still around. And one of the abilities of BISP was effectively to be able to be rebranded by another government to continue. Because, there is a very strong desire for political ownership in this country. If the Sehat card, which was also incredibly popular, can become, I guess, some other card, right, owned, it tends to continue. And once you've also allocated budgets, it becomes part of the the budgetary cycle. These things tend to stay. But a lot of these, let's say, sugar, textiles, a number of these industries, I mean, it's been 50 years.
Yes.
So 50 years of stasis. And with 50 years of stasis, or with whatever circular issues that we have as a result of it, whether it's circular debt or anything else, it just keeps compounding so much that it is now a disproportionate burden on provincial and federal incumbents. And for them to move forward with this requires some degree of, across the board consensus that what we're doing is important, that, we will not take cheap pot shots at one another or use it as an excuse to bring one another down. That's what I mean by polarization. Because like even extremely polarized countries today include the United States. It includes many European countries.
Yes.
But there are bipartisan issues where they work across the aisle, realizing that these are important. And why I find the polarization in Pakistan problematic is that the process or even the desire for accommodation is almost finished. And that is what's absolutely necessary. Like whether it's a constitutional amendment, whether it's anything else, the desire is to railroad it through.
Yes.
Right? And you can do that in some sectors, but in sectors where the poorest of the poor get affected, that can create the seeds for, law and order. It can seed disaffection and things like that. And a lot of these areas have that knock-on effect possibility. The power sector is one example.
Yes.
Sugar could be another, although there's plans to do massive stuff around sugar, and I hope it happens. But I just think that that's why right now polarization is a huge issue, because for reform to work, it needs political ownership.
Yes.
And political ownership ideally should be broad-based. And if we can't get that, we are in a difficult situation.
So you've been around, out and about working with the development sector
Yes.
for several years now. Can you name a few reforms that you think were actually very successful, where there was consensus and we did actually achieve something that we have sustained over time?
So, I think some of one example would be, the development sector was involved in that, which was the changes in the Hudud laws to be more secure for women, because ultimately that led to legislative changes. Legislative changes are permanent. I think BISP is one such example because it's constitutionally ingrained.
Yes.
I think the other thing is, now I think this is where there's a problem with the development sector, is that the development sector almost works now like, this is a bad example, but like, CEOs of companies where they're looking to give returns to the shareholder rather than build the company for the long run. Right? And so with the donor sector, where they're looking for, let's say, changes in how people look at certain issues or affect certain programs, and then your time frame is 1 year, 3 years, that's not going to happen. I find it fascinating that, Pakistan has moved forward on issues such as, let's say, sexual harassment, problems at the workplace for women and all that. There's been a lot of development sector interventions in this 10, 15 years ago. Now, the thing is that when you try to disaggregate where did the change come from, now you can no longer do it. And so sometimes with the development sector is they seek to see what have you done in a year, and then they measure it in terms of outputs and trainings. But that's not the change process you're looking to affect. So I sometimes do think that some of the things that we've seen change, there are very few that happened within the time frame of the programs that we're talking about, because it just takes time to kick an idea about, sometimes somebody comes and all that. But like these examples are those where they have done stuff. I think the work that they did in education was phenomenal, because there's a caveat to that, but like most schools in Punjab and KP, ghost teachers are not a problem. They were one of the biggest problems. Attendance of teachers has improved. These are all due to reforms in the system. They've all got like these provincial information units which track how schools are doing, where allocations are happening.
Yes.
And this is where like transparency of data is something that has helped. It hasn't made the system perfect, but then there are also things like where we've seen in the past, it's interesting to know is that people won't send their children to school, especially girls, if there's no boundary wall.
Yes.
And now it sounds really bad that boundary wall is what's preventing an education, but the fact that all schools now have boundary walls, it gives a sense of safety. And these are things that have changed. Dangerous schools where, upkeep was really poor, the building could fall, those things have been addressed. These all happen to be somewhat brick and mortar and supply side solutions. Where we're still having problems is attainment. Is that like kids are not learning. I mean, that's still something that has to be cracked.
Yes.
But again, I would still say is that like in the 10 years of work that, say, the British have done, the Americans had done, and of course others, it's led to some significant things. Even the fact when we had PEEF, the Punjab Education Foundation, I mean, it was the world's largest voucher scheme. I still think that all of these, where we can nitpick at where these have succeeded or failed, are reforms that took, before this, we had Pada Likha Punjab, and then we had Junejo. And there's like a big gap,
Yeah.
right? So I do think that, this stuff that's been happening that has been useful. There's work that's happening in the FBR, for example.
Yes.
And that work is also using behavioral insights to understand what is it that creates more compliance. And it's interesting now this is where like the issue of reform is like, so if you're going to use nudge elements, that's a issue of expanding it a bit. It's issue of greater efficiencies, like getting more people who are in the system to do better or who've lapsed. But again, the real reform cannot be done just through that.
Yeah.
Right? That's then a political project. How do I get the traders who vote for me? How do I get, the police and lawyers who are not filing, or not the police, sorry, the doctors and lawyers who are not filing? So for us, in terms of reform, I sometimes think like the difficulty that sometimes comes with the intervention of the donor is that we address some very important issues. But those issues also tend to be some of the less contentious areas. And these bigger ones where we've got these things, and rightfully so, that should be the responsibility not of the donor,
Yes.
but of the
exactly.
state. They're not here to do our thinking for us. They're not here to push us into being a functioning state the way we should be. But I think that within that interaction, hopefully, I mean, that's something that we should look, because I sometimes on occasion think that the role of the donor is overstated in this country. The donor also has an outsized role, and I think one of the reasons for that is procurement. Every so often, if you have a reform, you need a really good consultant who's done work around the world, who's got certain degrees. Now, Pakistan has the money, but we don't have the systems that allow us to pay him.
Yes.
Right? Like, donor kitna paisa deta hoga Pakistan? Right? It's probably not even 1 to 3% of our budget. I know I'm just making this up on the top of my, but it's
I
not
think
that
it's a
much.
bit more.
It's a bit more. ठीक है, बहुत ज़्यादा कहते हैं 9 से ज़्यादा नहीं हो सकता.
जी.
But in the thinking of the state in certain sectors, they have an outsized influence. And that's partly because they can use money to bring in the best talent and, do design thinking, technical inputs, all that. So, I mean, that's another area that Pakistan has to look at. And so one of the reforms these days that I'm interested in, I don't know enough about, but if you've been to Lahore recently and, they've got this cleanliness program.
Yes, yes.
It's doing really well.
Yes.
And I spoke to one of the people in it, and they did it without any donor help,
Oh, wow. I didn't know.
without any foreign technical consultants. It's homegrown.
That's
And
amazing.
so when you're looking at sustainability, that is the gold standard.
But do you think the same is going to happen to this after government change, if the government changes, that this won't be sustained?
So I personally think that, I don't remember the exact details of the design, but they've got a lot of incentives for people to clean it up, monetary incentives. They've got I forget how it works exactly. So, I mean, that's something that's there. So one of the great things is that if you find a funnel of cash to ordinary people, even though it's not an entitlement, it tends to be harder to take back. But I believe that I think that it will survive in one form or the other.
Okay.
It may not be as efficient if somebody is not interested, but I don't see them like taking it away entirely. I think the only country recently that has actually managed to take away things entirely is America, right? वो left, right, and center चीजें cancel करते रहते हैं, and it's created a great degree of issue because canceling on its own is not enough. Because like if you're now used to cleaner streets and it's no longer happening, and you don't have a rebranded new version where political ownership is elsewhere, I think the people will talk.
It has left a vacuum in our development sector.
Yeah.
Yeah. So everyone can see
Absolutely.
where
Absolutely.
the dent has been.
Absolutely.
So one thing that you talked about was PEF, right?
Yes.
That it worked really well. I've been thinking about from that there are some private actors who are doing great work when it comes to the education sector.
Yeah.
I can name a few, not in order of priority, but just how I can recall. Maybe the Citizens Foundation,
Yeah.
TCF, there is Teach for Pakistan, there
Yeah.
are a few others.
Yeah.
So do you think that involving such actors makes a reform more efficient and it neutralizes the, sort of political, how things can be labeled for one political party or another, and it just neutralizes that political element of reform?
So I think it's always useful.
Yeah.
And it's always useful because it also helps influence government by looking at people who are doing it not at the same scale government is doing it, but they've got their own innovations, they've got their own perspectives, and that always helps government. That association, as you said, is also beneficial because it also creates almost like a third-party endorsement.
Yes.
That this is
exactly.
above board. This is not politically motivated. The issue, though, that I sometimes have with this is the expectation on occasion, okay, these guys can take it over. They can't. The government scale is so vast that, somebody who runs 200 charity schools is not going to be able to take over the Punjab education system.
So true.
Right? And on occasion, log make flippant, inko de de, inko bula le, ye wo. So I do agree with you that there is a role and there is an integration that's absolutely necessary and that you can expand on it. But the aim needs to be not just to help their work, but also to ultimately influence government in how it approaches the work that it's doing. And I think I'd like to clarify one thing. Like on occasion, there is what we'd consider a bad word in politics or development. And wo jo hai na, they stay away from the idea of political ownership.
Yeah.
They stay away from the idea that किसी को फायदा मिल जाए. Now, I agree. I can see where the issues in that are, but you see, creating something that is politically acceptable
Ji.
is not the same as partisanship,
So true, yes.
right?
Spot
And
on.
quite often they say it as if they're one and the same thing, but that's not true. And for us to create a coalition or to do work that moves things forward has to align with the incentives of all the players. And if, whoever's in charge of the executive at the time takes benefit from the ownership of it, as long as it's a well-designed intervention, and it can be made sustainable by making it permanent through budgets, routines, procedures, apps, transparency, that is an ideal outcome.
Yes.
Now, the problem is that on occasion, the technocratic side of the development sector sees that as very, difficult, or it compromises their vision. But you see, a well-designed reform makes for a great presentation, but not great execution if it doesn't have political ownership. And that is, I think, one of the challenges that we have to continue to strive for. And even when, let's say, international human rights people come to Pakistan, there are parts of the West where they have this view that, the capital punishment in no form is good. Because effectively, the idea is that a society is committing murder by sanctioning one execution. Now, that's the point. Now, when they come here and they want to help that kind of reform, because Pakistan mein the problem is that there are huge lapses in the justice system. So जब आप किसी को execute करते हैं, the responsibility is even bigger on the state कि कहीं इसमें miscarriage of justice ना हो जाए. But if somebody just comes with a Catholic idea कि यार ये ना करे and you must legislate against capital punishment, it will not go anywhere. But if the outcome is to protect people against miscarriages of justice, or to have a situation where capital punishment is not carried out. So now if we look at the way Pakistan is doing it, because of commitments internationally for human rights, because of GSP plus as a conditionality, what they've done is they haven't suspended capital punishment, they're just not carrying it out.
Yeah.
Now that is the bridge, for example, between what, say, a technocrat HR person would like to see as ideal, the constraints, but the advantages the Pakistani political executive has, and then you come to a workable way forward. Now, maybe they don't see that as what they really want, but I'd argue is that this is the problem with development on occasion, or development practitioners or technocrats, is that the ideal, the secularized PowerPoint or Canva presentation is so important to them that the bridge to actually doing something meaningful stops, because they're not willing to engage with context and politics.
Yes. The ideal Pakistan exists in some form of a presentation.
In some form of a presentation.
So one thing that you talked about is political ownership, and I think that's one of the major key factors that I've gathered from your conversation is important for a good reform.
Yeah.
If you have to name 3 or 4 other factors, like the top 5 factors that you think make a reform not perfect but close to perfection for execution in a country like Pakistan where there is so much polarization, what would you say are those 4 facts?
I mean, I think one is that if any reform where acceptability increases, is that one of the reasons, let's say on occasion when bureaucrats drag their feet on a reform, or even politicians do, is because the existing situation is more opaque. And reform creates some degree of transparency.
Yes.
So if the system includes data generation, public access to data, that's always helpful. That is something that tends to persist. Number 2 is that the civic tech side, where ultimately that the citizen has to engage with the state, the more impersonal it can become or convenient, that also tends to move forward. Kal humne nadara band kar diya, I can guarantee we're going to have protests, because jo purana system tha was a pain to deal with.
That's true.
Right? And so those are some things that tend to help quite a bit.
Definitely.
I also think is that, there are certain areas where it's much more difficult. And what ye hota hai is that we have to also create the incentives for systems improvements, for recruitment improvements. And we are seeing the benefits of that from what I've seen in the provinces I worked in, like in Punjab and KP, that the new incoming lots are better.
Yes.
And it's so interesting that the process of recruitment could actually be made even better if you were to test how they speak and how they deliver a lecture. But usme discretion aa jati hai. And so just to keep it absolutely data centric, like they do the recruitment. So now that's an environmental constraint. But I'm just saying is that particular way in which this is a suboptimal outcome, okay, we should also be testing how they speak and all that, lekin wo us tarike se shayad nahi hota. I think that's one issue. One thing, I'm now going to jump into something else entirely, because I just got reminded. Somebody who gets an absolutely free ride in the failure of reform in this country is the judiciary. The stay order is like a nuclear bomb.
That's true.
You can't do anything. And stay orders are very easy to get. And secondly, you can shop for stay orders. Certain stay orders are easier to get in Sindh. जब आपको तीनों नहीं थे, आप बलूचिस्तान चले जाते हैं. And So when we look at where, for example, Recoding, there was judicial intervention to effectively stop the project, and we lost in arbitration. By the way, we always lose in arbitration. And now, I personally think that one of the key elements is like, let's say you even have privatization. One of the things that they fear about privatization is कि कोई judicial order आ जाएगा,
Yes.
कोई कुछ और हो जाएगा. Like, so one is that of, the market, the political acceptance, but one of the big areas where actual reform needs to happen so that the kind of intervention that creates the seeds for, let the ad hoc continue forever, happens to be the judiciary. Now, for example, across the country, it's impossible to kick out a teacher for being a bad teacher.
Yes.
Right?
Unfortunately.
It's impossible.
Yes.
You can kick him out if he doesn't come to school for 3 years, right? But you can't kick him out because
Out of the system, no.
out of the system if he's a bad teacher. You could technically do it, but because of the way that the contracts and the way that the courts enforce this, it's almost a no-win situation. So I do think, like, again, when I come back to Recoding, like where there was judicial intervention, where the judiciary suddenly decided we should be getting more money for this, without realizing we've just had 70,000 people killed, we have no electricity in the country, us zamane mein. Who is going to invest? So when you want risk-oriented capital investment, usme what do? You raise the profitability, because that's how risk works.
Yes.
And because of a judiciary that doesn't understand that, we now have a long delay, we had arbitration, ab kahin wo cheez ho raha hai. Like, it's a lost decade. When we look at Pakistan steel mills,
Oh my God.
why shouldn't that finish, and why are people getting paid for nothing? Again, most people pin it down, यार ये तो सिर्फ corruption है, ये इस party के लोग हैं, इनको salaries में. That's not it. It's also the fact that they know for a fact that the judiciary will intervene to create a massive problem, and in many ways they stop. And the unionization, unions are a good thing, but they don't actually work with the unions, deal with the unions, because even unions eventually, once they understand the sector, and when it's not just a free meal of salaries, उनको पता है कि reform अब आने वाला है, या सब जाएंगे, या we work with management or the government to, get something out. So I just think that when we talk about broad-based reform, one of the biggest threats, and I've often felt this, is the lack of judicial understanding, the ease with which stay orders are given, and then moving forward, how long it takes for case resolution.
Yes.
And I think that's actually a threat almost to the economy.
So you've talked about appropriate roles for the judiciary, for the politicians, for the technocrats. What do you think about bureaucrats and the academics? Because I think these are also two very main actors when it comes to the development sector. And what do you think is the appropriate role for these two actors?
Academics are straitjacketed in this country because we've got good academics, but you don't give the economists all the raw data, right? They need access to data. They need access to institutions. Fundamentally, most institutions are anti-transparency and anti-outsider. Mm-hmm. And so, I can criticize there's a good majority of academics who may not be very good at what they do. But that tends to be the older lot, where teaching load was what was emphasized. Up to since 2000, research is a big thing and all that. But, putting together, say, a meta-analysis of 7 papers or an insight piece without actually going and having the most robust or latest data, I think they're quite straitjacketed in this country because access and the rules for access are not clear. Mm-hmm. So if you're a famous economist, you will get your foot in the door at FBR for what you need. But if you're a young guy at the University of Sargodha and you're competent, whatever, you're not going to get in. And you don't know what the rules are. Yes. Like because there's a lot of discretion in who they gatekeep and who they allow inside. when it comes to bureaucrats, I've fundamentally seen all kinds of bureaucrats. And more often than not, I'm actually quite impressed.
Really?
Yeah, because I don't think Pakistan has a capacity problem. Pakistan
That's true.
has incredibly bright people. For all our criticism of CSS, it does manage to get some smart guys in the door, some very hardworking guys.
Yes, absolutely.
But again, the bureaucracy, its incentives are this like, I think we need accountability, but the problem with NAB style accountability, and I'll give you a story, I just couldn't believe it, is like they want to save their skin. Reform mein problem ye hota hai is that things are new, you'll be sanctioning different things. And remember, the first 2 years of reform is always a story of mistakes and correcting your mistakes. Mistakes are the natural outcome of how you work.
Exactly.
But if you're going to criminalize that, ye to reform nahi chhodenge. Because they are going to be held accountable for something which is natural,
Yes.
and it should not be happening. So, I mean, about 6 years ago, I remember I was speaking to a senior bureaucrat, and they were talking about this one instance. I don't think the case eventually went through, but like around, he was saying like 5 years ago, एक bureaucrat को allocation मिल गई कि आप ये service road बना दें. Release at the end of the year was 60%, तो वो acquisition नहीं कर सका. 5 years later, they were looking to file a case कि आज हम वो service road बना रहे हैं, लेकिन अब तो इसकी कीमत 4 गुना ज़्यादा हो गई है. So he's responsible now. He was trying to explain कि आपने जब मुझे पैसे ही नहीं दिए, like the full 100%, मैं कैसे खरीदता? But then they said कि but you have now caused 4-time increase. And I realized that, and I was speaking to that guy, I said, this means we were going to become, shukar hai ye hua nahi, the only country in the world to criminalize opportunity cost. And you understand that concept. If you criminalized opportunity cost, there is no limit to how much excesses you can do.
Then everybody will be a criminal.
Everyone's a criminal. At that level, I mean, I do have sympathy for the bureaucrats. By the way, bureaucrats also tend to be very old school. They also have a very high perception of self. Some of them don't like data. Some of them love the way things are being done. There are tons of problems.
All sorts of bureaucrats.
All sorts of bureaucrats. But I think there's enough promise in the system, and the one thing that we have to assess is capacity is not the issue. The issue is orientation, the issue is incentives. And the incentives under the service structure are really problematic because they reward safety. I'll give you another example that जब हम projects बनाते हैं, let's say at the federal provincial level, so they look at the outcome, right? इसने आपने इस district में अस्पताल बना दिया.
जी.
But that is not what you are here to do. You're not here to make a hospital. You're here to reduce maternal mortality, infant mortality. You're here to ensure that communicable disease. You should be measuring that. After 4 or 5 years, are those things that determine success, not the fact that hospital ban gaya. So I mean, I just think that the incentive structure jo hai, where when they argue that bureaucrats can be an impediment to reform, is also a function of the service incentives that they've been given. The other issue is also that sometimes with the bureaucrats, as I mentioned earlier, is jab aapki continuity of service hi nahi hai. You know, if somebody is in, you know, he's the labor secretary, and next he's the, you know, health secretary. You know, so that you have to give it now 6 months before he's up to speed. And the moment he's up to speed, now he's sports secretary. Right? So, I mean, wo bhi unka to solve karna hoga, where those issues are. I mean, it's an imperfect story.
Yeah. From every angle.
From every angle.
Another element that I think you can actually really talk about, which is very important, is the role of communication in reform programs, because you've been, you know, you've led the behavioral change communication unit in KP, and you've seen how it actually shapes the reform, how you were talking about the signals that IMF gives, you know, that it lends to us. I think it's the similar sort of role that communication plays whenever there is a good reform program, the way we market it, the way it influences decisions. What do you think has been a good example of an excellent communication plan in terms of of like a reform plan, and what do you think is the ideal situation? Like, what is the ideal communication role for a reform?
Number one, most of the work I've done is around behavior change and communications. I always have a problem when speaking to, partners and all that, because they believe that you can dress up a donkey to make it look like a horse. Right? Right? Communications is not going to solve your design problems. Agar intervention theek nahi hai, and the problem is they actually believe that it might. And so one of the benefits is where you get the comms people involved in the beginning is because you get input at the design phase. You cannot create a product, execute and say, ab logo ko bata do. And it doesn't work right. I can give you an example. This one I can talk about.
Yes.
And this was something that I found really good because the team was amazing, right? They were making an app for employment. And what they were trying to do was that they were making a specific app, which underserved areas in Pakistan ke, where employment come hai, but you do need domestic labor, domestic help, guards, cooks, and also factory workers.
Yes.
So to create an app specifically for that. जब वो ऐप बन के आया, you couldn't tell the difference between it and Rosie.com. And in the sense that के जो initial set of jobs जो उन्होंने डाले थे, they all required master's degrees. अब उन इलाकों से तो ये नहीं होता.
बिल्कुल.
Right? And so the work was that because it presented a communications problem, the argument that we made is that with this set of jobs, we send it out into the lower socioeconomic and not one of them is eligible. When an app has no use on the first go, no one comes back to it. Even when it becomes functional 4 months later, people won't reinstall it. And so then the launch was delayed.
No.
To get they went to the factories, whatever, and then they had a series of 100 jobs that's starting off. Now, that was not a communications campaign I had done, but that was a great alignment of communications while product was being developed.
Yes.
And so both the development sector, the government, everybody, वो बहुत end में ले आते हैं. And उसमें क्या होता है कि there are problems then not of communication, because communications is a two-tiered process. Everyone tends to solve the problem of information deficit, which is कि ये चीज़ है. But step 2 is how do I get you to use it or change your behavior?
Exactly.
And for that, the product has to be compelling and what you say has to be compelling. And much more time has to be spent on it than just saying, kaam khatam ho gaya bhai, 3 hafton mein nikal, right? It doesn't tend to work. I think in terms of well-communicated initiatives. So there are those initiatives where you do communicate, but you have to sign up. So that's like an ID card, right? So usme communications ka itna nahi hota. But there are areas, despite the problems around, let's say, polio. Because polio it's the nature of the disease where a small minority of holdouts prevent the disease from being eliminated, like smallpox. But by and large, over the years, they've done a good job of communicating who's going to come to your house, how they're going to hold your baby, what they're going to say. And you are going to have holdouts. You have even holdouts for HIV medications to this. In every population, I think they've done a reasonable job over the years, and also putting it front and center as an issue to solve. That where we are now at the last mile problem, which means we might have to even put in more effort. Yes. I think one of the more masterful things was the 18th Amendment. Because, like the 71 Constitution, Pakistan's greatest difficulty as a state where the levers of strength are so strong from the military, police and the bureaucracy for the political executive, or even if it's a military leader at the time, that nobody wants to do accommodation. But the fact that we made that Constitution and the 18th Amendment, I think that is also a communications issue where you sold this and everyone had to give up a little, but they all did it for continuity.
Yes.
I thought that was impressively done. And the fact that, let's say, so many people have wanted to reverse it, and it might be reversed in the next 6 months, I don't know, but it has had a good run. And it's had a good run because obviously the provinces love it because they're just getting, transfers. but also that it's embedded itself in somewhat to people's minds. But I think that, those are communications examples. I also think that Pakistan did well during COVID-19.
Yes.
You know, whether people followed or not, they did really well, because whether you were illiterate, uneducated, whether you thought it was a Western conspiracy, but you knew कि 6 फुट का फासला है, you know कि mask लगाना है, you knew कि हाथ धोना है. And for something like that, that was the trifecta of the most important things in preventing vectors of infection. So I mean, we've done reasonably in many ways. I think like right now, what's terribly communicated, for example, which requires a lot more, is like, so those of us in the urban centers, जिन्होंने पैसे लगाए solar पे, right? We have disproportionate voice, and even good people don't understand why that's a problem.
It's a bit more technical as well, so not a lot of people get
Exactly.
the technicality.
So it's something over time that the government has to communicate well, so that people realize that, you know, you are forcing people, gharib people, to pay for stuff that we got you in 2014, 2018, jab you were begging for no more 12-hour power cuts. Because we're exiting the grid and leaving the responsibility to those who can't afford solar. So I just think like it's something interesting where there is a lot more room to educate people, so that when the tough choices have to be made, uska grounds banana hai. And the way it's happening right now is कि rumor आ जाता है कि, you know, बेचने वाले price अब change हो जाएगा, पहले 20 रुपए अब 10 कर देंगे. Everyone's wondering, and that process of actually meeting, explaining, getting in with groups, consultations, it needs to happen.
So I think all the examples that you gave of, you know, good communication were sort of like, for instance, COVID-19 or polio. You know, everybody has like a clear goal, like there should be no polio in Pakistan.
Yes.
We need to get rid of it, right? COVID-19 has to go. So this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
So it was very cohesive in terms of everybody was aligned.
Yeah.
But when it comes to, you know, issues like where there is segmentation, when there is disproportionate representation, like you talked about solar panels, or we talk about like smaller provinces not getting enough chunk of the divisible pool when it comes to development, that's where maybe the cohesiveness or the alignment is not there, because the chunk who needs more communication is disproportionately smaller. And is that the reason why these particular reforms don't get that particular level of communication and that finesse?
Okay, so I think that we can't really compare these two, right? With both polio and COVID, you know, the alternative was moth.
Yes.
Right? With the others, it's different. I think that it's a question of process and the poverty of how we engage as a state. Like, देखें, जब भी आपकी Federal Divisible Pool हो, NFC हो, जो भी हो, no one is going to get what they want.
Exactly.
They are going to have to be acceptable suboptimal outcomes, where everyone trades XYZ for something they want more.
Yes.
And हमारा problem ये है कि like the trust in the system has gone down so much. I expect everyone to start with a maximalist position. मैं ये लूँगा वरना कुछ नहीं लूँगा. But I expect कि that is a negotiating tactic. But if you actually believe कि मैं सिर्फ ये लूँगा और कुछ नहीं लूँगा, then we've got a problem. And in that case, sometimes I feel like the most powerful, whether it's the military, whether it's the federal government, whether it's, you know, the province dealing with the district, just because of disproportionate power, they're not willing to engage with people who want something else. I don't think suboptimal outcomes are a bad outcome, because everyone has come to agree कि ठीक है बस इससे गुजारा कर लेते हैं. That's how states move forward.
There has to be some level of compromise.
There has to be some level of compromise. So I just think like in terms of like जैसे आपने communications का कहा था कि COVID and all these are easier cells and to go back and say कि we did well, but partly because the threat is so existential.
Yes.
Right? Whereas here we have to understand is that that's the nature of, you know, economic and political contestation. And that contestation, the aim is ultimately to come out with something that you can live with, not what's ideal. And that's why maybe sometimes the communication story isn't as neat or nice or something for you to be able to, do some chest thumping on. But I just think it's also just a function of a state and its structures that is not directly oriented to responding to concerns or responding to non-concentrated powers. Like spatial problem bhi hai, right? We know that a concern from Lahore has more weight than one from Nowshera.
That's
And that's just partly how the system is devised. The same is true for parts of Sindh or Karachi
Balochistan.
or Balochistan. So, I mean, even despite the inequity nationally, but even within the province, right, Quetta is going to get a fairer shake than any other place. For me, I think that why I've often said is like when I come and do this sort of work, is the first thing I say is you have to mitigate your expectations because this donkey is not a horse. Right? We're going to make it look like a nice donkey. Right? We're going to make it look like a donkey everyone wants to ride, but it's not a horse.
Yes.
Because that is again fundamentally an ask which is against transparency and true engagement with the end user.
Mm-hmm.
You tell him you're going to give him a mediocre product, but that solves some problem is a much better outcome than giving a mediocre product, promising the moon, and then them being utterly disappointed.
And I think that's like a fair point because everyone at the end of the day has to let go of something to get something.
Yes.
For every program.
Yes.
I think it was the same for the 18th Amendment.
Absolutely. I mean, credit, हम तो अक्सर complain करते हैं, लेकिन credit to the Punjab, it gave up some stuff.
Yes.
Right? With like, ठीक है भाई, हमने बातें की थी आपके खिलाफ, लेकिन ठीक है, आज आप ठीक है. So, I mean, impressive again, because I firmly believe that this idea of the suboptimal compromise solution is not a bad thing the way we present it here. Because this is the only way that we can get states to work. And this is also fundamentally then the problem of, like I alluded to earlier, is the technocrat who has the ideal development solution and is not willing to engage. Politician ke apne, he's got problems. There are problems in the bureaucratic system. There are problems in the community. Everything will go through a process of moderating outcomes.
Yes. I think we should let the donkey be a donkey.
The donkey needs to be a donkey. A donkey is a noble animal.
At the end of the day, yes. Thank you so much for that, Fasi. And I think you've given us a lot to think about, especially by giving these examples like COVID-19, how we work together for the 18th Amendment,
Yes.
and how we can work together for better
Absolutely.
reforms.
Yes.
Before, ending the podcast, I wanted to ask a question because, you have a huge fan base. A lot of people look up to you as a consultant, as a very good speaker, as a Rhodes Scholar.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask you if you have a message for, all the young people who are watching this. How should they proceed with their careers? How do they make decisions based on, your life experiences? What can they draw from your experiences that can help them in excelling in their careers?
So I mean, मैं हमेशा डरता हूँ when I say this is how you become me, because I'm sure nobody wants that in that way. लेकिन
Many people do.
नहीं, there are better people to look at. लेकिन I would make a few recommendations.
Yes.
One is that read a lot.
Exactly.
Read as much as you can across different subjects. You don't even have to be an expert in one subject. उसका फ़ायदा ये है कि it helps you in thinking about language without you realizing it. You become a better writer as a result and a better thinker. The second thing is that there's a very big danger. These new technologies like ChatGPT and all that, they're phenomenal. I'm shocked at the rate of increase. But you can't outsource your thinking to them. Mm-hmm. You can do it when you're sending a report or an email, but it's very clear when you come in person that you're not the person who's thought of this idea. So that's why I recommend reading immensely.
Yes.
The second thing is, I find a mistake that people do in their early career is, look, I was a hiring manager multiple times, and invariably every young recruit is full of energy. And they come and they tell a person, who has 25 years of experience, I think you should be doing this. Right? Don't do that. In the first year of your job, the most important thing is you show up on time, do what is asked of you, and do not create more problems than your remit allows you to. They will ask you what you think. It'll be after a year. Because they have to trust you. They have to understand that you've got what it takes. So if you're on the polio program and in month 3 you say कि आपने तो 10 साल ज़ाया किया, this is my idea, right? You're going to be laughed out of the room. And many kids do that. So I would really recommend, if you're young in your career, the most important thing is to show you're dependable, you're reliable. Brilliance is evaluated when you are promoted to the middle tier.
Exactly.
That's when that starts. So you can demonstrate it over the years when you're given the opportunity, but don't go in for it when you're not supposed to be doing it because they're looking at other things. So that's, I guess, my advice number 2. And number 3 is, so I was an idiot when I was 20, right? I presume they are idiots when they're 20, right? हमारा सिर्फ ये फ़ायदा था कि उस ज़माने में फेसबुक नहीं था, सो वो एविडेंस ऐसा नहीं रहा, ठीक है, हमारी स्टूपिडिटीज़ का. So I just want to say is that moving the state and getting change is always going to be slower than we want it to be. And not everything that is performing poorly is happening because of ill intent. It is also happening because there are a lot of legacy forces at work. And change will require time and effort. And if you have the opportunity, try to look into it. You'll moderate your views, but maybe you'll find something to contribute to that can actually move the needle. So, I mean, it's just a moderation request that I'm putting. So I guess my 3 pieces of advice are extremely conservative for young people who want to change the world, but I think they'll put them in a space where they can actually move forward.
That's so true. And I agree with the fact that, thank God, our evidence is hidden. We were all idiots, of course.
बस हमारे 1-2 दोस्त मर जाए तो फिर तो zero evidence.
No, thank you so much for that, Fasi, and I'm sure that this podcast is going to help so many people. Thank you so much for taking out the time, and I'm really hoping that we get to another podcast where we get to talk about another topic.
Definitely, I look forward to it.
Thanks to everybody who watched this, and take care, ji. Allah Hafiz. Bye.